So thank you everybody for coming to Growing Up in Science. This is the next in our series of conversations with professors about how they came to where they are today. And we're very fortunate to have Maria Geffen here today, who is a professor of, let me see if I can get this word right, Otorhinolaryngology and neuroscience here. And I won't give it further introduction because I think I just want to hear that. Thank you very much for coming. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so I guess I can talk about sort of my passion science. My passion science has been very linear. So I think since about 7th grade, I wanted to study psychology. And I was good in math, and so once, I think in my sophomore year, I found out in college about computational neuroscience. I was kind of like, that's going to work well for me. And I went to Princeton, and John Hopfield was working at Princeton, and so my college advisor told me, you get assigned an advisor, so he told me maybe you should just work with John Hopfield. So then I went to talk to John Hopfield, and I ended up doing a senior thesis with him. So that was pretty easy. In my undergrad, I studied molecular biology with biophysics. We didn't have a neuroscience major then, but my project was basically neuroscience. So we actually tried to understand how whiskers work in rats. So in general, rats sense the world to a large part using their whiskers. And whiskers are kind of weird because there's just only 20 of them on each side of the face. And so they go past surfaces and kind of whisk, right, to figure out what the surface is and to orient themselves. So something that John and I noticed when we were reading papers is that before doing experiments, and people would trim the whiskers to 1 centimeter on one side of the face. And the reason they did that is that they could record it in the brain and then get more data, with the standardized measurements. But in fact, if you think about how whiskers work, the front whiskers are really short, the back whiskers are really long. And so effectively, when the rat is sweeping them past the surface, they have very different mechanical elastic properties. And so the longer whiskers are going to be sensing lower spatial frequencies in the texture, and the shorter ones will be sensing higher frequencies in the texture. And so we developed this idea that the whisker pad actually works very much like our cochlea, like the hair cells. So in the cochlea, we have this range of hair cells, right, the gradient that goes from high frequencies to low frequencies. And we propose that whiskers are doing something very similar, just in a very rudimentary fashion, since there's only 5 columns of whiskers. So we indeed then, if you know Sam Wang is a neuroscience professor, and he plucked the whiskers from a rat they were not going to use. And I took those whiskers and measured their elastic properties, and I calculated that in fact, as would be predicted by very basic physics, the longer whiskers had lower resonance frequencies and the shorter whiskers had higher resonance frequencies. And in fact, that very silly kind of project became a very important discovery in the field. So somehow, just because people were trying to standardize their experimental techniques, they were just overlooking for decades these properties, the elastical properties of whiskers. So then I interviewed for a PhD for graduate schools, and when I came to Harvard, there was a professor there, Chris Moore, who got really interested in this idea. And he basically told me that if I came, we could just explore this idea further and do some experiments to measure whether in fact the brain was registering these differences in frequency in activation of the whiskers. And we did that and presented this at the Barrels meeting. And essentially, we presented it, and the next year there was a whole poster session devoted to just elastic properties of whiskers. Because people were like, oh, obviously the mechanics of whiskers have to do something with perception, and somehow nobody studied that. So anyway, so early on, I didn't realize that not every project I'm going to start is going to be this like revolutionary kind of thing.
How did you find it out of curiosity? Like,
What?
how did you end up making this insight in the first place?
I don't know.
Were you just staring at some whiskers and
Yeah.
had an epiphany? Or?
Yeah. Well, I wonder whether that was like John Hopfield's idea, and he just made me think that I discovered that. I don't know. But yeah, so anyways, and I was still mad because I ended up getting a B+ for my senior thesis, which was then like published as
Why?
an author paper. And the reason why is because they were examining me, and I wrote the measurements, the estimates for the frequency to four places post decibels. But really, you should only have 2 to 3 significant digits.
Wait, seriously? That was why?
That was why. And I run into people who were on my thesis committee. I mean, they don't remember they have so many undergrads, but like Michael Berry, and I'm always teasing him like, why did you give me a B for my thesis?
So you'd all better watch out if you have a few too many significant digits, then your life is clearly going to be ruined.
Well, I mean, they had a good point.
Yeah.
And I really don't like it when people start like writing out the significant, like what's on our calculator, It's true, it is really annoying. However, obviously something was overlooked.
I'm sorry for interrupting you there.
Yeah, so, no, it's good. So then I came to Harvard, and I could either keep working on my whisker project or join a different lab. And I did 2 rotations. I did 1 rotation in Marcus Meister's lab, who studied processing in the visual processing in the retina, looking at multi-electrode signals from many neurons recorded simultaneously. And I also did a rotation in Bernardo Sabatini's lab, who is kind of this pioneer in like 2-photon imaging and optogenetics, and also studies things like sort of cellular level neuronal plasticity questions. And during my rotation in the Meister lab, I also made a discovery, which was super cool. So I tried to look at what happens to how retinal ganglion cells respond to visual stimuli in the presence of motion in the periphery. And we do that right? Our retina has to do, or our brain has to do that all the time. We move our eyes every 200 milliseconds, so the whole visual field shifts, but it appears static to us. So we're somehow compensating for that. And so we wanted to see what happens in the retina. Earlier studies showed that many of the cells shut down. What I discovered is that indeed many cells shut down, but the ones that shut down were off-type cells. And in fact, there was a whole subpopulation of cells that were normally responding to light going off. They were off-type, but just following this motion, they would switch to being on-type cells. So, and the cell membrane of retina is a little weird, like there are many more off-type cells than on-type cells. But just after the saccadic motion, the balance would switch and there would be mostly on-type signals. So it's as if the visual system was trying to detect very small changes in the signal right after the saccadic motion. So then I couldn't decide, and I was like, well, should I keep working on the whiskers? That seems like such a good project. However, I already did that in my undergrad, or should I join the Meister lab? So then I actually asked John Hopfield, and he said, well, if something is going well, you should just stick with it. But of course, I was too stupid to listen to him. He had a very good point. And I joined the Meister lab, and we ended up, developing that and publishing a paper on that. And then I got involved into a different project, which is a collaboration with the Laurent lab, looking into portal processing and olfaction. and I worked on that, and then it was time to graduate, and I started looking for a postdoc. So for a postdoc, I knew that I wanted to be in New York, because that's where my husband was going to law school. He actually took a year off to hang out with me in Cambridge, but then we were going to move back to New York so he would finish the law school. And so I wrote down all the labs that I liked in New York, and I visited them. And I applied to one program that I applied to was at Rockefeller University at the Physics Center. They had the Center Fellows, sort of like what we have for CNI Fellows. And so they had one fellow per year. And then I got that. I got selected for that. And so then it was a no-brainer because as a Center Fellow, you kind of have quite a bit of an autonomy, so you can work with anybody you want, or you can do something else. And I like that. And so then we moved to New York. I don't know what to...
How did you end up picking this whole line of work? I mean, I can understand why anybody would want to work with John Hopfield, but like, why were you even interested in the questions that John Hopfield was looking at?
Yeah. Oh, like when I was an undergrad.
Because it seems like you got put on a direction, a track pretty early on, and then you ended up being able to follow that track, even if you were moving a little bit.
That's right.
So I'm wondering, how did you end up on that track?
Yeah, I mean, I just, I don't have like a very deep insight other than, I just wanted to do computational neuroscience with experiments. So I realized that experiments were important. And
how long did you realize you wanted to do computational neuroscience?
I mean, as soon as I learned that it exists.
Wow.
Which was like, my sophomore year, probably.
Okay. Yeah. It's definitely before I realized that computational neuroscience even exists.
Right. So somebody told me like there is such a thing as computational neuroscience. Yeah, I was going to do psychology, but psychology got, at least the way it was taught to undergrads, it got pretty repetitive by like the third class that I took. And so
I see.
Then I thought neuroscience would be more interesting.
Did you realize like early on that you wanted to go an academic route?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be an academic.
So separately from the computational neuroscience, you wanted to be...
I'm from academic families. I'm a third-generation PhD. And so I was very, very comfortable in the sort of academic world. Yeah. I don't know, do you guys have questions?
I can warm up with a couple of additional questions. I'm curious what the transition was when you were working on some similar stuff in undergrad, and then you got to grad school.
Right.
I think that anybody who's done any undergraduate research and then done graduate research realizes that the two are not the same.
Yeah.
What was it like having that experience change?
Yeah, I don't know.
Even if you're doing the same stuff.
Right. I mean, in graduate school, I sort of had such a good initial 2 projects in both labs that I got to the result very fast. And then it took a long time to actually get enough data to have a paper and revise the paper. But I just loved graduate school. So I think I even liked it better than undergrad.
In what respect?
I like being in the lab. I like my lab mates. I like the flexibility, So, yeah, it's very unpopular these days to say that, but I spend most of my time in the lab,
Well, I think most grad students do that, whether or not they...
I don't know. I mean, most times during the day. But we would go to the lab, around 6 we'd go to the gym, then go to dinner, come back to the lab, do a couple things, go to a bar, come back, clean up the experiment.
Did you sleep?
Yeah, I slept plenty.
In the lab?
No, but it's just like a thing. It's like there's the lab and the home, and it's kind of like, you're somewhere in between. Yeah.
Well, I would definitely encourage the students who are in the audience to do the going to the gym part, even if you are going to come back to the lab afterwards.
What about the bar part?
Okay, the fun part. Were you going with lab mates or with friends outside the lab?
Well, my boyfriend slash husband is not in academia, so
Got it.
mostly I would go with him. Yeah.
Pre-law folks.
But yeah, there were groups, there were like contingents. There were like neuroscience students would be here, and the biology students would be in this bar, and then we would go somewhere else. Cambridge is very,
This is true. Yeah.
So yeah.
How did you feel about, like you were saying how the psychology classes seem to get repetitive,
Yeah.
and when you change to different content of classes in undergrad, you're probably more engaged.
Right.
How did you find that versus grad school, the coursework and the engagement there? Like, how could you compare the two?
Yeah.
And if you could
That's
also
a good,
speak to that transition.
that's a good question. So I took lots of classes in undergrad. I like taking classes. I felt like I was learning a lot and I had a lot of time. So I would take like 6 classes every semester, I think, until my senior year when I did my thesis research. But then for graduate school, I picked the program where there were no required courses. You had to take 8 classes by the end of your time at Harvard, but they were extremely flexible with what would count towards your classes. There was one class that we had to take, which was like the journal club kind of class, where different professors would come and talk about their research direction. So, but other than that, everybody took their own set of classes, and you could design your curriculum. And so I really liked that. But we actually just had 2 weeks ago, 60th anniversary of the Harvard Biophysics program, PhD program, and so I went there for the reunion, and I appreciated how this program has been. First of all, it's been around for 60 years, so it's a really long time. But its premise was that it's just going to be really flexible and kind of focused on the students, so the students decide what they want to learn. It's only possible if it's a very small program, so I don't think we could do that with 30 NGG students. We couldn't just say, oh, just take whatever class you want. You'll learn something, you'll figure it out. But definitely as a result of that, I actually place less emphasis on formal teaching. I feel like in graduate school it's important to learn how to read a paper, and it's important to learn how to find the paper that's going to let you answer the question, but you don't have to memorize it for a class. So, yeah.
I'm interested in the process of coming together, pulling together a research program of your own.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, in my postdoc, when I came to Rockefeller, I kind of had to figure out my own way, and I was very ambitious, and so I thought, oh, well, what I really want to study is the auditory system, because I want to keep doing what I was doing in the retina, but the retina is a slice, and that's just like so boring. I want to study the brain, and you can do optogenetics in the brain, like optogenetics was just coming online then. You could record from many neurons, so you can do all the experiments in the mouse brain. But then, people were talking about how the visual system is not great to study in mice, but hearing is really good. And so I got really interested in that idea. And so I thought, oh, what I'll do as a postdoc, I'll just do some experiments in mice in the auditory system. But because I wasn't really affiliated with an auditory lab, so what they did is they gave me a room, and a very small budget, and were like, you can do your experiments there. But it didn't really, it's really hard to set up sort of your laboratory under those kinds of conditions. And so I went to Tony Zader's lab at Cold Spring Harbor and learned the techniques there. But then it's just every step was so difficult. Like getting animals was difficult, doing the animal protocol, because I wasn't like a PI, you know, I was just a postdoc in between different advisors. But I was very lucky because I got the Burroughs Wellcome Career Career Award or Transition Award, like a career grant. And then
Like while you were a postdoc?
while I was a postdoc.
So this was something that happened
It's
during...
like two years of postdoc and 3 years of faculty. And then after 2 years of postdoc, I just applied for faculty positions and I got a job here. And that makes a big difference because, you know, the job here comes with a startup and then you really have the money to set up the lab. And so I actually didn't finish the paper I was doing at Rockefeller. When I came here, I finished the experiments and then published it as the first paper from this lab. But yeah, it's really hard. The thing that was hardest for me were like all the rejections that I got, because for graduate school, you know, I had these very famous advisors, and you know, we would submit a paper and people would write, you know, like, what a beautiful piece of work. This is so important, so exciting. Thank you so much for choosing our journal. And you know, when you submit papers as a young PI, you know, you get comments back that are much less welcoming. So,
how have you dealt with that, just psychologically?
Let's see. Well, I was really depressed the first year here. It was really difficult, and then things got better.
Just because of time?
It was just, I don't know, like, it was so shocking to me that how different it is to be kind of a faculty in the medical school environment versus be like a postdoc or a grad student in these like elite kind of, you know, very ivory tower places.
How so?
Like, you know, as a graduate student or postdoc, like, you know, everything I did would be like, oh, good job, you know, this is so great. And as a faculty, you actually find out, like you go to conferences as a postdoc or graduate students, you know, many people want to talk to you and it's very exciting. But when you're young faculty, actually nobody wants to talk to you. People are like, oh, what are you studying? Oh, okay. Like, until, you know, like you have to reach some threshold, but it gets very competitive very fast.
Is that because the other professors see you as a rival rather than...
people like defending their turf, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And here we are as PhD students or postdocs thinking that, oh, it's all going to be better at the next step, but just gets worse.
It's better, like it gets better again. I think for me, I mean, definitely like the transition from postdoc to assistant professor was the most difficult stage. Yeah.
I feel like that may also be field specific. Sometimes some fields are maybe more territorial than others. I don't know.
Don't think so.
No? You think it's the case for... Oh, okay. We'll orbitide all of us if we choose to go that route.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I talk to, like, say, like, I talk to my chair. My chair is like, yeah, well, we'll support you as long as you're successful. Okay.
The definition of successful is that somebody else supports you.
Oh, well, it's very interesting. No, so somebody from, when I started my lab, somebody from human resources came to me and read with me. There is a there is a faculty handbook, and there is a paragraph, and the paragraph tells you what it means to be successful. It's like 3 sentences, and she took like 45 minutes reading it with me. You know, and like basically it's like, you know, like what do you need to get promoted for tenure? And so then she translates it for me. She's like, you know, it's like 7 to 8 first author publications in journals, at least like X, you know, impact factor. You have to get like 1 to 2 federal grant or 1 level grants. So yeah.
It's good that it's spelled out.
They weren't letting you like, yeah, oh sure, yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
already talked about this. I'm in a famous lab, and it's easier for me to publish. When are we going to move, as scientists, to a double-blind review system?
Yeah, I would love that.
Faculty member.
I would
at
love
some point,
that.
Right?
Yeah.
At this point, you still have something to gain from that when you're now the famous
Right,
person on the other end, right?
yeah,
The established power.
yeah.
You have nothing left. You have no skin left in that fight.
I mean, I think the publishing system in general needs to change. I don't really, like, peer review system it's not, I mean, it sounds good in principle, but in, practically speaking, it's not it's not all as pure as it, sounds.
In no other academic field other than science do we do this submitting by name and yet the reviewers remain anonymous.
That's also true.
No other field.
Yeah.
It depends on the aspect of science. So, for example, the big computational neuroscience conference, Cosine just finally switched to double-blind. To double-blind.
Yeah.
It was previously single-blind,
Right.
which seems to me to be, strictly speaking, worse.
Yeah, cosine is absurd. It's a really good example of like, people can really quantify the problems there, and the problems are very big. So, yeah, I hope we can have some sort of, I don't know what's the right thing to do. My first beef with academic publishing is all the journals and the publishing houses that are making money off of it. I don't really understand why we have that, and the only reason why we have it is that we as a community, still promote people who publish in Nature and Science, and give them grants, all this stuff. Why would we do that? It's it makes no sense as a scientist. Like, so many papers get rejected from Nature and Science, and the kind of like the importance of the last name of the last author is so important there. It doesn't seem like a fair system, so I don't know.
I mean, I think it's demonstrably not.
Right, absolutely, yeah. So I kind of like, for me, I would love to, and then the fact that, less privileged scientists and less privileged parts of the world cannot even read what we publish in Science and Nature is just absurd. So, and unethical and unfair. So for myself, I would just publish in like eLife and PLOS Biology, in open access publications. But for my postdocs and grad students who have to go in the job market, I feel like they need, although like to me it's also like plenty high profile, but obviously, if you're looking at the resume, so again, I don't know why we're doing that, but like we continue to do that. We'll look at the resume of somebody with Nature paper.
Tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, and then you just like pick the one with a Nature paper, but it seems so wrong. Yeah.
Along this line, I was thinking,
Yeah.
like, where do you think the place of preprints
Yeah.
are in the general ecosystem of publishing? And
Yeah.
do you feel that, what would that mean if preprints are more valued to graduate students, postdocs, and faculty
Yeah.
moving along in their career?
I mean, I think they are more valued, but nobody has time to read all the preprints in their field. So, yeah.
Well, there has to be some kind of filtration process.
Right.
But
Well, and also, I mean, I think peer review is good. The way it works out is not good, but theoretically it's good. So it's good to be able to peer review the papers. I think the fear is that if we just have a system where you just do the preprints, so much of the stuff, so much of the papers will be unfinished, not true, incorrect. How do you sort through that? So I guess the journal system helps sort through it, but it's not fair or good. Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
How did you choose Penn after your postdoc? Was that
Ah.
an easy choice for you, or what was?
Well, It's mostly kind of family, personal reasons. So my parents live very close by, and my husband he's a lawyer, so he had the bar in Pennsylvania, or reciprocal bar with Pennsylvania. So and also I only had 2 job offers. My other offer was in California, and my husband did not want to move to California. We had 2 young kids. My family was nearby, and Penn Stam's great, so yeah.
Awesome. So we talked about failure modes of science.
Yeah.
What do you have any advice for early career researchers, so like PhD students, postdocs, stepping through this process, either with science, what it is, or just even there are a lot of challenges orthogonal to science. It's just tough being a PhD student, period.
Yeah.
Even were the scientific world better.
Right.
So what is your advice?
My advice is to believe in yourself, and so just stay true to yourself and don't do something that people tell you to do.
What if that thing does not end up being a successful thing?
I mean, I think if people are PhD students, here, they're gonna do well. So I went back to my PhD program reunion, and everybody who came to the reunion, maybe it's self-selective, but 20 years later, is a successful person, having a fulfilled career. Some people are yoga instructors, but some people are professors, and some people are in finance or biotech. But basically, I would not worry about not succeeding later on. You will find your way, you will be successful. It's just kind of a question of in what field and how to find what gives you the best, most satisfying returns.
How does one go about being true to oneself?
Yeah.
It hasn't been any easier for people since Polonius first.
Is that right? I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't even know what I mean by that, but I think you want to figure out what the passion is that drives you. So yeah, let's just say not be a career. What's it called? Let the demands of the career overwhelm your personal ambitions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So are the things that probably motivated you first for the computational neuroscience, like you said,
Yeah.
Still are source of motivation for you, or do they change, or how much?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's so crazy because I feel like I've been asking, I see people who are not in science, and they're like, so Maria, what are you studying now? And I'm like, oh, I study how neural networks work and code information. They're like, what? You've been doing this for 20 years.
Isn't it done now?
Yeah, what? Because in outside of science, people move to different projects. They're not doing the same thing. I'm still doing the same thing. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like I'm just starting to answer some questions I had when I was a PhD student. Maybe that's bad. Maybe I'm just too conservative and haven't caught up with the rest of the field. I mean, there's different, in science too, there's different questions that people get interested in. And I think I'm much more cognitive oriented now than I used to be. But yeah. I mean, even the fact that my PhD, my undergraduate thesis was on the vibration properties of the whiskers. And now I study hearing, where frequency decomposition is the fundamental computation. It's kind of
both of them sound
very
cute.
circular. Huh?
Both of the projects that you
Yeah, they were.
cute and
Yeah,
yeah.
but I'm still doing the same thing. I'm calculating receptive fields of auditory neurons. So yeah.
What do you think is the solution to what's called the postdoc pile-up?
Yeah.
Way too many postdocs.
Yeah.
Very few jobs.
Right.
What do you think is the solution?
I don't have a solution. Yeah, I have 5 postdocs in my lab right now. I mean, some things is not all of them want to stay in academia. So I think postdoc is, a good, they're all happy. So, but I think it doesn't have to end up in academia. That said, I would say that if somebody is ambitious and knows they don't want to stay in academia, they should not be doing a postdoc, because, you know, it takes away like 5 years where you'd be growing your career outside. But it's very good. It's if you like doing science, and if you're not too stressed out, that's a very good kind of job for 5 years. You learn a lot. For people who want to stay on the academic, in the academic environment, I think what helps a lot is starting to think about grants and writing grants, and not waiting to publish. You know, some of you probably have PIs who publish lots of papers and are not really pushy in terms of getting your project published, but you have to push.
How do you push?
Huh?
How do you
write
push?
the paper and give them the paper.
Is that the your general way of getting people to do things? You just do the thing and then tell them to sign off on it?
No, well, I think like for me, I have actually, like one of my postdocs wrote the whole paper and it's now on my desk. And now I have to read it, and he's going to get that paper. You know, that will happen sooner than people who have not written the paper, you know, and we have to write the paper together. So, not that that's, you know, I'm happy to write papers with the students, but just,
So, you have many students in grad level,
Yeah.
postdoc level. Maybe, I'm just, as a grad student, I actually didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do, which is weird because the grad student process, selection process kind of predicated on knowing exactly what you want to do. And for anyone that didn't really know, that may have come to you, how did you guide them so that they were able to figure out what they could do, or
I don't think people know when they start graduate school what they want to do. And I think if they do know, if they think they know, I don't think they have enough data to know what they want to do, you know? So I think the fact that we have rotations is great because you can try different projects and think about them. In terms of sort of what I do with the rotation students, the best thing to do with the rotation project students is to give them a project where they would be using all the techniques they need to learn, and it would be a small project that they could finish in 4 months. So sometimes I do that, but that means that I have to actually think really hard and kind of do some research before I can do that. So sometimes that works out. Sometimes I don't do that, and I tell them, oh, why don't you just think about a project and what you're interested in. We can read some papers together and then see if we can come up with a project. I'd say that also sometimes works. Sometimes they come and they say, like I had one student who came and said, what I'm really interested in is spatial navigation, so I'm going to do a project on spatial navigation, which is not what I do in the lab. And I said, well, that's interesting, but it's equally interesting, to do some auditory behavior where you're detecting the sound and noise. Like, there's no reason why a priori one is more interesting than the other. So maybe you can try that and see where that goes. And, and that worked out great. So, yeah. But yeah, I don't think, I always thought that I knew exactly what I wanted to do. But I think you learn more if you don't think that you know it. I mean, yeah. Yeah.
For any undergrad who's applying to grad school, they might get advice that they be very specific in their application.
Right.
And that, in a way, kind of has to balance with this idea that you don't really know what you want to do, but
Well, that's a very good question. So many things are like that. For example, your prelim is like that, right? In your prelim, you have to say, I will do experiments A, B, C. My outcomes will be A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, and I will learn X, right? That's your prelim. That doesn't mean that when you start doing your experiments, you're going to be doing A, B, C, and those will be your outcomes. It's just an exercise to think through what specifically you could be doing. And so the applications are very much like that. You don't have to know what you want, but you have to be able to imagine a scenario where you're reasonably doing something that's of interest to you and what that specifically is. Yeah. I think it's, it's like when you write grants, the grant proposal has to make sense. I don't know what I'm going to be doing 5 years from now, but in the grant proposal, I describe exactly what I will be doing 5 years from now under these magical sets of, scenarios, plausible scenario that I'm going to do the experiments.
So in a way, I guess what we're doing with an application or doing
Right.
with a proposal is
Yeah.
just laying out a plan, but
Right.
not necessarily a contract.
It doesn't have to be even your plan. It's just a plan. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
How do you divide your time among the many tasks that you have to do as a PI?
Yeah.
Between writing grants, mentoring students,
Right.
publishing paper, reading paper.
Yeah.
How do you, what's the percentage?
Yeah. Going to the gym, playing the piano, 3 children, 1 husband.
And a partridge in a pear tree.
It's a lot. I also teach. For example, like this semester I'm teaching class, and so that has the specific times when I have to be in class. So that goes kind of in my calendar. I also have to have a lab meeting, and I meet with each of my students for half an hour.
Every week?
Every week, yeah. So that goes in my calendar. And so those things are priorities in my calendar. Then kind of comes this other stuff. So some weeks I have a lot of other stuff, and other stuff are like faculty meetings, like meetings with other people visiting the lab, like hosting speakers. I don't know what else. There's just sometimes the calendar just gets filled up. And so what I try to do is keep blocks of time open where I can do actual work. So it's very funny. My husband, who's a lawyer, when I tell him I need to keep 4 hours open so I can do work, he's like, well, you're doing work all the time. And I'm like, no, answering emails is not work. That's just my extra stuff. But I mean, it is indeed that is work. Answering emails is work. But I need big chunks of time to write papers, write grants. Yeah, and sometimes I get better at it, but I still if I have a grant deadline, it kind of takes over my life for at least 2 weeks before the grant deadline. Nothing else gets done.
No questions. I've really been enjoying these questions.
Yeah, they're very good.
I was curious,
So-
Yeah.
I recall that you were involved in mentoring around, I think it was specifically for women,
Yeah.
after one of the conferences in the
Yeah.
fall. And what sort of drove you to that? And what do you
Yeah.
think are the issues that are sort of unique for women in neuroscience?
Yeah. So that's a big topic. So CoSign, which is Computational Systems Neuroscience Conference, has sort of been my conference since I was a graduate student. The first time they organized this conference in I think 2002 or something, they didn't invite any women speakers, so it was all men speakers.
Seriously?
And then people sort of got upset, and they started inviting more women as speakers, and then eventually they had always had a male and a female co-chairs of the committee, which I guess I don't know if I like it because it's like the idea is you can't trust the male chair to pick women. You know, like why would you do that? You know, why is that a rule? But so Conrad and I actually were co-chairs for 2 years of cosine a couple of years ago, and the conference. Oh, so I'll tell you 2 stories that are funny. The first story is about NIPS. So you guys know about NIPS, Neural Information and Processing Systems. So that's a big conference, and it was actually kind of popular in the 90s, and then it became less popular. Now it's huge because like all the Google and the AI people go there, and like it gets really, it's really big. So my first conference when I was working with John Hopfield was to go to NIPS. That was the first conference I went to. And I don't know how big it was, probably like 1,000 people. There were 5 women there. One of them was an undergrad. One of them was a grad student in my lab, and one was a postdoc with Bill Bialik. So we're like the Princeton, 3 women from Princeton, 2 women, and there were like 2 other women there. And they had a party, and so we went to the party. It was in like some sort of, it was at Breckenridge actually, like one of these things, and they put me and the graduate student from my lab on like, they had 2 chairs like this, and we sat in the chairs, and they lined up, and they would time each other to talk to us. Like, because there were only 2 women in the room, so they ended up just like having these lines of people talking to us. It was really crazy. And I didn't appreciate how crazy it was because I was an undergrad, you know?
Why did they want to talk to you?
Well, I guess, I don't know, they thought it would be more fun than having like an all-male party.
What? I guess the parties at NeurIPS haven't gotten any less strange, just slightly different.
I mean, they have more women probably, right? Like, that was like, anyways, it was very strange. So, but it's fine, you know. I realized that, like, you know, just in our field, like, there are very few women. Now there are more women. So then, cosine, when I was the chair, you know, we counted how many women there were, and there were about like 17% women, and which means that it's a 700 people conference, so you have, you know, over 100 women. But anytime you're in a social situation, it's not quite, you know, as crazy as that NIPS party, but like you're the only woman at a table. And so I thought that we could organize a social event for women to kind of get together and like, you know, meet each other and become more, kind of discuss other career issues and maybe mentoring. So, but like not explicitly for women, just like kind of women-centered, like men could also come. And so we had one lunch like that. And then it grew into this event sort of more about promoting diversity at cosine. And they now still have that, so they have that every year. So, but the question is it successful or is it not successful? Because it's, one of the years it was actually really, it gets very depressing. So it's better to have those events than to not have them, but they're kind of not fun. And then this year, somebody ran the statistics about cosine and kind of like the top people who have the greatest number of abstracts ever at cosine because it's so selective. And out of like the top 30 or 20 people, there is only one woman who has the like more than, you know, 4 abstracts. Yeah, and then the same for, so this is of all time, then the same for like just this conference. And then they looked at, they tried to make it more or less even for, although there's always more men than women who are speakers, you know, invited speakers, but at least they tried to even it out. So it's not, you know, it would be like 6 to 8, but not 10 to 2. But then they have the abstracts that are submitted, and the top, you know, 30 are selected for talks. And out of those top 30, there were only 2 that had women PIs on them. So it's kind of like we think we're at 17%, but I think we're really at a much lower number. And then the question became like, is it that we have few women in the field, or the women in our field don't go to cosign, or once they do and they submit, there is a bias against them in the selection process. So we don't know, yeah, but it continues. It's kind of a thing where the NIPS experience was bad, but then kind of after that, in graduate school, I didn't really mind. Like, I didn't feel like there was nobody who would talk to me because I was a woman. But once you go to this kind of more senior stage and you're again like the only woman in the room, and you realize that it's a systemic problem, it's actually not clear what to do. So I don't know. And many people say, oh, look, the problem is that we just have very few women. Well, in neuroscience, we have been at parity in terms of PhD students since the 90s. We've been, 50% women PhDs. And if you go so this is 90s, that was even before my time. So if it had propagated, we would be at 50%, tenured professors now, but we're not. I don't know what the numbers are.
Where does it change? Is it parity
so
to postdocs as well?
So the drop is at every stage.
Since
from
PhD.
So
Got it.
yeah, so the drop is at like the postdoc level, and then assistant professor level, and then associate professor level.
Got it.
And then, but it's not. I don't know what cosign can do to increase diversity. And it's not like, and then people are like, well, it's a computational field, we just have few women, but I'm directing this computational summer school this year in Portugal, and we got lots of applications we got like 180 applications for 24 spots. But out of the 120 applications, I think it was something like 85 women, 95 men. So it's at the PhD level. Even for the computational class, you are almost at parity. So it doesn't really.
Wow.
There is a big drop.
And yet cosine is still only
and
around.
And yet cosine is
it's not even
still
20%
like,
women.
Yeah, we don't know. We need to run this, or somebody needs to run the statistics on cosine. So we don't really understand. But like, there is this thing, and so then actually senior women who are sort of could be computational in neuroscience field were commenting on Twitter about like the nature of cosine and how they feel unwelcome there, and they came up with this hashtag #brosine, which was hilarious. But like, I never thought about it in those terms, because to me, of course, since my NIPS experience, I felt things have been getting much better.
Perhaps this is not. I don't know. Has anybody in the room been to cosine? I know a couple.
Yeah.
What do you think is? What do you see? Did you see aspects of bro culture which are intrinsic to conferences and to culture versus? I mean, there is the system, and then there is the way that it's implemented, right?
Yeah.
So people can be there. There can be hostility, but then there's also hostility which is sort of intrinsic in the way that things are set up. How do you see those two balancing?
Yeah, I don't know. I have to say that I didn't notice that just because I'm kind of used to that sort of attitude, which is not a good excuse. But I have been thinking about different conferences and like the comfort level that people feel and the graduate students feel. Like for example, I now go to auditory system Gordon conferences, and it's just much more inclusive, But it's not like we don't have a problem. We had the same problem for the auditory cortex conference 4 years ago, where there were like one woman speaker out of 30 invited speakers, and people were trying to boycott the conference. So I don't know. You start thinking, oh, well, other fields are different, but I don't know if they're different, or it's like those specific organizers kind of create the environment where people feel comfortable. Yeah.
Like as a female PI, like how many applications for your lab, for example, get like male versus female?
Oh,
Yeah. So how many, like are
that's
they
a very good question. You know, I think I get like equal number, but it's just it varies. I don't, you know, it's you don't get like an application for a postdoc that's really good very often. So I don't know.
I'm going to suggest that we take any other questions offline
Okay.
because we're out of time. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thanks. Yeah.
This will be our last Growing Up in Science of the semester. We will restart in about 2 months and have a few during the summer, hopefully. So thank you all for coming. Let's thank Maria again.